Hey, it's Huck. And I remember previously posting a video on this channel some time ago calling for sanity testing and criminal background checks, but not just on all new gun purchases and private gun transactions, but I suggested we should start, in fact, with similar testing and checks on all current gun owners. Because, as I said in the video, there seem to be thousands of lunatic gun nuts who shouldn't be trusted with a pair of scissors in running room, let alone a gun. Now, since that video, a lot has happened. There was that whole explosion of media reports of incidents involving police use of excessive force, gunning down unarmed black men and boys all over the country. I longed to do something on that, but my health and other circumstances kept putting it off. And then this week, of course, the most recent in a long, sordid history of highly publicized mass shootings occurred. This one in Charleston, South Carolina. A tragedy that succinctly seems to illustrate America's dual, impregnable demons of racial intolerance and gun violence. I really don't have an answer to America's race problem. I do believe that as long as state and local governments continue to enshrine the Confederate flag under the masks of free speech and heritage, we won't really make much progress. For black folks, the Confederate flag represents a people so devoted to slavery as a legal institution that they were willing to fight this country's most deadly war over it. More than 150 years since that flag first flew over Charleston, its symbolism of racial hatred has not diminished. In fact, has been almost universally adopted among the growing number of race-based hate groups and wannabe secessionist militias that advocates claim number more than 1 million members nationwide. On this I am certain. Any hopes to begin healing the racial divisions in America will need to start with permanently delegating the Confederate flag to appropriate museums. And then there are the guns. The many, many guns in America. And the many, many gun nuts. Gun nuts come in all shapes and sizes. They exist in both North and South. And some are even highly educated. But they all do seem to have a few things in common. One, they tend to tune out any facts or information that challenges their views. They tend to take every excuse and argument offered by the NRA board and its president, Wayne LaPierre, as gospel, regardless of its rationality or lack thereof. A common theme upon being challenged with real facts is the retort, don't engage with him, you can't reason with some people. Another, among the less restrained among these folks, is the use of intimidation. That can vary from the comments you'll see posted in response to videos like this one, such as, yeah, come and try to take my gun away, asshole, to the more aggressive tactic of marching in full military armament to the local McDonald's, or the state capitol, or their local congressional office. There are words for folks like this, and among those words are lunatic, extremist, militant, and unhinged. But I'll just use the term gun nut, if that's all right. There's no argument that can win over a gun nut. They don't hear your arguments. They don't believe any facts you have to offer. One of the NRA arguments to any gun control measure is that the Second Amendment prohibits such measures. And indeed, our radically conservative Supreme Court, to a degree, sides with them on this issue, though it did not when the court was less conservative. The current court, in opinions largely written by Antonin Scalia, ignore the words well-regulated and militia, as if they didn't appear, or have vastly different meanings than they did at the time they were written by our founding fathers. That said, even this conservative court has upheld the right of the government to restrict gun rights to some degree, the ownership of explosives, hand grenades, and bazookas, and the right to ban certain individuals from gun ownership based on criminal history or mental illness, for instance. But gun nuts take most of their arguments from the NRA, which is basically a terrorist organization at this stage of their existence, made up of largely the heads of some of the most profitable firearms and firearm accessory companies in America. Their one and only desire is to sell as many weapons and weapon accessories as humanly possible, mocking the resulting carnage in their wake. As such, the NRA is a virtual myth-making machine, popularizing some very clever mottos, which their loyal gun nut minions recite as their personal pledge of allegiance to guns. Mottos like, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Statistically, that's an argument devoid of any semblance of truth. Justifiable homicides, or the use of a firearm for self-protection, is practically immeasurable in any real calculation of the death toll by firearms in the United States. Justifiable homicides make up less than 0.1% of all gun-related deaths in America. And this despite the fact that there are already more guns in America than people. More guns invariably translate to more bad outcomes, not better ones. Another gun nut motto is that any gun restriction, regardless of how modest, inevitably leads to a ban on all guns. Some gun nuts, not many, but some, will even go so far as to say they don't oppose universal background checks or bans on, say, 50-bullet magazine clips, but that such legislation, if passed, would surely open the door to greater and greater restrictions until guns are banned outright. Lunacy. Gun nut lunacy. Finally, there's their argument that criminals will find a way to get guns regardless of any well-intentioned restrictions. And gun nuts point to the high homicide rates in some cities that have passed such laws. Now, to understand this argument, it is necessary to concede that, well, no restrictions, no matter how severe, is ultimately going to solve the entire problem of gun violence. And that criminals do, in fact, criminally steal, well, maybe as many as 500,000 firearms that have been found to be used in their crimes. But to argue that because we can't solve all gun violence, we should not take steps that promise to reduce the carnage is, well, gun nut lunacy. It is estimated that only 60% of crimes involving guns were legally purchased, leaving 40% illegally obtained. We do know, however, that currently anyone can buy a gun through a private trade or purchase, and in many states at a gun show, without any record of the purchase or transfer. And with those loopholes, along with the number of home burglaries and home break-ins where guns are stolen, it's little wonder that cities with high crime rates suffer, even after gun restrictions are passed. It is known that states with the most restrictive gun laws do suffer much less gun violence. But the truth is, we're not really certain because, thanks to the NRA, the federal government is not even permitted to legally track gun purchases, nor is it required or even permitted to track gun-related deaths and injuries. Much of the statistical data we have is voluntarily submitted by less than a third of this nation's 18,000 law enforcement agencies, where local jurisdictions at least allow it. Thanks to the NRA and a former congressman by the name of J. Dickey out of Arkansas, a bill passed in 1996 ending funding to the Center for Disease Control and to Health and Human Services for the study of gun violence. So we don't really have a lot of documentation to go on regarding the effectiveness of gun control measures or any other data that might help us sort through this whole thing. And maybe that's where we ought to begin. Maybe the House and Senate can get over their bickering long enough to approve one tiny measure in President Obama's budget for 2015. That would be a $10 million line item budget appropriation to the CDC to begin once more to study gun violence in America. Now that's far less than the $26 million budgeted for that purpose in 1995 before the NRA and old J. Dickey stepped in. But at least it's a start. Of course, we know how that vote will go. After Sandy Hook, where 26-year-olds were murdered in the most violent assault rifle attack imaginable, the Senate failed to pass a very, very modest bill that proposed mandatory background checks by a vote of 54 to 46. It needed 60 votes to get through. This bill was about as watered down a compromise as it gets in real-world politics, exempting, among other things, private sales and family transfers of weapons. The reason it failed? Only 4 Republicans voted for it. The rest were opposed. It also secured 4 Democrats who voted against it. The reason, they all said, was because a very vocal contingent of their constituencies feared that the bill would set up a federal registry of gun owners. This, despite the fact, of course, that the bill explicitly banned any such thing. Still, 42 Republicans and 4 Democrats, rather than showing any leadership, instead of standing up and explaining the facts to this lunatic fringe, kowtowed to the crazies. Egged on by the NRA, the gun nuts won. Only when we elect men and women with real courage and principle are we going to begin to turn the corner. Anyway, that's my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. Thanks for watching. I'm Huck. I'll see you real soon.